Welcome to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I am so excited to introduce you again, actually, to Zach Weiss. Zach is founder of Water Stories. Zach is a visionary and a water cycle restoration expert, filmmaker, and educator. After 10 years of building water retention projects for clients around the world, Zach started training others through his organization called Water Stories, which he founded in February of 2022, so that any professional, land steward, or concerned citizen could have the same positive impact on their waters and lands. Now, with over 300 students and a community growing annually by the thousands, the impact of Zach's work can be felt around the world, offering hope grounded in example that by partnering with nature, we can heal the water cycle and actually reverse climate change. So I want to say that those are my words. And I have to also say that this is the second time that Zach and I have had the opportunity to speak. And I was in the very first class on these techniques, technologies, interventions that Zach ran through Water Stories. And that was 3 years ago, almost to the date. And this is such important work, and it really does change microclimates at least. And that's evidence that we can actually mitigate the grander scheme of things. So, Zach, welcome. I am so delighted to be here with you.
Oh, thanks so much for that beautiful and very generous introduction. And I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Well, you have had a very, very busy 3 years, needless to say. And I'm hoping that you can catch us up on what you've been up to and the things that you've seen, because this is a really, really bold assertion that I made based on what I understand about your work and the evidence that you've been able to provide in microclimates. And I'm wondering, I think it would be useful if it's possible to just sort of explain the foundation of why healing the water cycle, first of all, why healing the water cycle would affect climate change, but also what is that and what are you doing? And then give us some real life examples would be amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, we find everywhere that water on this planet is life. All life erupts from water. And it has all of these really important roles. In fact, the only reason that our planet is livable is because of water. When you look at the heat dynamics on the Earth, somewhere between 70 to 95% of them are driven by water specifically. And that's because it has this incredible ability to absorb, re-radiate, and disperse heat just in its normal self. And then it has these phase changes, which have these huge amounts of heat either absorbed or released. Now, it's very complicated. There's no good models for water because there's ways it heats up the planet and cools off the planet, and it's all these balancing regulatory mechanisms. And so when we were looking at climate change, we just set it aside as a variable that's too complicated to consider, so let's not worry about that yet. So we don't really hear about it much as part of the issues that we have going on, but we see it very much in flood, drought, and fire, all of which are water-based issues from structural problems, root causes that have their foundation in water. And so when we work with water, we get results very quickly, kind of incredibly quickly. It's interesting, just in it's one of those things where the more you dig into it, the more incredible stories that you find of lived experience of people. And then the more you do it, the more incredible stories you find. And so I'm thinking right away of hearing of one farm where they're doing this type of work and syntropic agroforestry, and they've recovered the precipitation has almost doubled since doing this work. It had a high precipitation. Previous owners cleared all the forests. It became known as the land of the refugees of the water, and their amount of precipitation dropped in half. And now they've recovered to more than three-quarters of that original amount. And this is in just a couple of years, and then, about a decade or two for that. Another project we just got to visit in Montana where there's incredibly rare organisms growing with their habitat in the water body that we created that 2 years ago was a parking lot. And so we've gone in 2 years from basically a parking lot to habitat for these axolotl in Montana. They're a chain of a barred tiger salamander that keeps its gills, and they only exist in 2 lakes in the state. They're incredibly rare, and now they're in a third, this little water body that we created from, a dry, barren landscape a few years ago. And so it's really fun because it has these really big long-term effects like lowering the temperature, restoring rainfall, mitigating climate change, and it has these quick immediate effects like now I have water, now my environment has water, now I see all this wildlife and birds and more vegetation is growing. And so it has these two really quick feedback loop and a much longer feedback loop. Both are very beneficial. But so people get to experience the quick, get excited about the quick, and then they want to keep moving in that direction.
So you said, I just want to connect the dots because we are in this massive cycle of drought, fire, and flood. And I don't know that everybody connects that to the water cycle. And you had created these wonderful animated illustrations for how this whole thing works and what the larger system is. And if you could explain that, because it involves the water table and it affects soils and all, if you could explain that just briefly, I think that would be really helpful for people.
Yeah, and there are a few pieces of this puzzle. So these are also feedback loops, you'll see, that feed into each other and make more of the same thing. And so in the healthy water cycle, we have rain falling from the sky. It's hitting a cool shaded earth that allows it to absorb that rain. That rain's going into the ground, charging up the ground. The plants are drawing that moisture back out, cooling the atmosphere, 590 calories per gram of water transpired, creating more moisture. And then also in the process, they're actually growing and producing hygroscopic microorganisms and volatile organic compounds that are then precipitating that water vapor back into droplets, forming clouds and then rain. And so with the healthy cycle, we get this constant process of surface cooling, releasing that heat up in the upper atmosphere, and then having this consistent, steady cycling of water. Now, when we start by clearing and hardening that landscape, now we're pushing all of that water away and downstream. So we're creating a flood somewhere downstream, but then we're also creating drought on that landscape because that water wasn't able to infiltrate. Then that land gets hot and dry and actually starts repelling the water. So when it does rain, even more of it runs off, creating an even worse flood downstream, drying out even more, and then creating these conditions where fire just comes through and consumes this very dry, desiccated landscape. And I think there's two things I want people to really consider here, because we have this ecological amnesia where we don't understand what we've lost. And so for one, look at what the landscape you live in used to be like 100 or 200 years ago. In a place like California, the entire Central Valley was wetlands.
Mm.
California has lost 95% of its wetlands. And then we wonder why there's such big issues with fire because there's no water anymore in that landscape. Globally, we've lost 87% of our wetlands, and they aren't really lost, they've been destroyed. So we've removed all this shock absorber, we've removed all this water landscape, and so we naturally then have these really erratic cycles because what else happens is as that land heats up, its ability to hold and re-radiate heat increases exponentially. And so as the land heats up, you get these high pressure heat domes that then push away against the incoming humidity. And so you get these really big storms that eventually overwhelm and create these torrential floods with really long drought periods in between. And this is something we're seeing all around the world in all sorts of ecosystems, climates. And the other piece is just ask the elders on your landscape what it used to be like. And you will hear all sorts of things about the drying and slowly moving towards dying of that landscape. We call this watershed death spiral.
So one thing that you didn't mention directly in your explanation is the water table. And I don't know that this is something that people really understand, and how we have been mining the water table also, and what the ramifications of that are, and how your work addresses that. So if you wouldn't mind addressing that too, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think the easiest way to look at this is think about it as a bank account. We don't think of groundwater and surface water as being interlinked, but they are very interlinked. And in fact, in the dry season, 50% of the flows of rivers is groundwater leaking back out into those channels.
So could you just also define groundwater?
Yeah, so groundwater is going to be our subsurface water. So water that has gone into the earth and matured over some period of time. There are shallow groundwater sources like springs that feed into creeks and rivers and things like that. Then there are also deeper groundwater sources, fossilized aquifers and things of that nature. Now, if we look at this like a bank account, if you're always taking out and never putting back in, we all know how that goes and it gets really bad really quickly. And that's exactly what we've been doing with groundwater. It has this natural recharge that we've been heavily degrading by degrading soils, hardening surfaces, draining wetlands. So we're removing the ability for nature to recharge that groundwater. And then we're drafting upon that groundwater again and again, year after year. And what we're doing in doing that is lowering the groundwater table so that all of the shallow sources that feed the rivers and creeks are going dry, and then those systems are dying. And then slowly over time, all of the shallower peoples are running out of water and it's getting lower and lower. And eventually you get to a situation where there's just not water in the ground anymore. And the rate of subsidence in California is now 6 to 8 inches a year, that the land is collapsing because of how quick they're sucking the water out. And so to try and stop this, they passed what's supposed to be the most progressive legislation out there. And by their markers, by an independent review, if they achieve what they call groundwater sustainability, only half of all of the wells in the state will go dry.
Oh my
So
God.
by their markers, half of everybody's water disappearing is sustainable water use. And that's the best legislature we have out there. Everything else just lets you freely take from the groundwater. Surface water is usually heavily regulated, and groundwater is much, much less regulated, allowing for this consistent and persistent over extraction.
And so what we're looking at there is the commercialization of the water industry partly, right? Where uh, companies are just extracting water to sell, right? With no ramifications for the company, no cost to the company or nominal cost. And also, I'm imagining agriculture.
Agriculture is a huge one as well. And it's domestic is also a huge one. As places develop, you can actually watch the groundwater table go down as development goes off in an area. So there's major usages, and one of the big things, I think there's two pieces of this puzzle. One, it's this very difficult scenario where the financial model incentivizes scarcity. And so in a water abundant world, water's not worth anything. In a really water scarce world, water's worth more than gold, more than oil, and we're already there in many places in the world where the cost of water is more than gold or oil. Um, and so there's this side, and then how many times we use water and how much it touches or benefits a place. And so it's many times not about how much water we receive, but how many times we use it before it leaves. And we've got these systems that essentially mine water out of the highlands, move it downstream very quick in pipes, not letting it touch or benefit anything along the way, to then get used in some house, to then get sent further downstream as quickly as possible. And so we're just mainlining water out of the system. And then with our legal apparatus around water, there's basically the downwater users always have priority. And so we're always incentivizing water to go downhill to service those users. And we end up with huge areas that should be hydrating, recharging the groundwater, cooling the local environment from that water slowly moving and trickling through the system. And the people here still get water, but instead we're taking all of that, removing all of that cooling. And if you look at the amount of cooling that could happen from the rain that hits the earth that is currently being drained away, that is roughly each year, that is roughly 10 times more than all of the energy we produce as a race of beings. So every year we're draining away the amount of water that has the potential to cool the planet 10 times the amount of energy as all of the energy we produce each year.
Wow. So I have to ask, it feels like a razor's edge because you are so engaged with projects that inspire hope, that actually are a solution. Like you're seeing the proof, and at the same time, you're so poignantly aware of the damage that's being done. And I'm wondering, how do you balance that? How do you find your way on that tightrope?
For me, this is where water stories really became the game changer, because I realized, and with the help of Sepp Holzer, who's my mentor, realized that I could work forever. I could work myself into an early grave, and it won't matter one little tiny bit because I'm just one person. And so, yeah, we can make springs flow 5 to 10 times. We can return endangered species to the landscape, but we need to be thousands and eventually millions of people doing this kind of thing. And so for me, that's really where I can put aside all of the horrible things that are happening and really focus on giving all of my time and energy to these change makers that are ready, willing, and able to implement these kinds of things in their own community and be teaching others how to implement these kinds of things in their community. And they're the most hopeful, inspiring, incredible people in the world. And so I can just, put my attention and focus towards those people and try and help them as much as possible.
I think it's really important to be able to train your focus, and what you put attention on multiplies. So what you're doing is not just hopeful, it's really practical, and like I said, one of the most profound things we can do to address this circumstance that we're in. I guess it takes everything all at once to make a difference, but this is just the most remarkable work. I'm wondering if you could just take some time to share the technicalities, like how the how-tos of what it is you're doing, and again, with maybe specific examples.
Yeah, I think so one thing that's very important to consider with this type of work is that it's really coming to a relationship with the landscape and letting the landscape lead, and not just thinking about what you as the human on that landscape want, but how can that landscape itself be benefited from your service to it. And so it's a little bit of a role reversal. And there aren't set recipes or strategies. There's lots of common tools and techniques, but the big overarching theme, I think, is said really well by Dr. Rajendra Singh, the waterman of India, is that where water runs, make it walk; where water walks, make it crawl; and where water crawls, help it go into the ground. And if you can help move surface runoff, water that happens when it's raining, and the best way to learn this is just go outside when it's raining, and you'll learn really quick how your landscape is receiving or rejecting that rain. And where the water is being rejected, where can you help hold it on that landscape? And so where is the right mix of land shape, geology of the land, and catchment area, the amount of area that is feeding its waters to that area, to hold that water in some way. A lot of times these are going to be earthen features, earthen dams, check dams, sediment traps, infiltration basins, ephemeral ponds, essentially working with the materials that we have available, earth, stone, and wood on that landscape, to help those waters slow down and go into the ground. And I'll say, you know, I'm more convinced than anybody on this stuff because I see it every day, but I have been totally blown away by what students have accomplished in a crazy short period of time. And so I'm thinking, some of our students in Chile were in this situation with this tremado soil that has almost no clay. And they're like, oh, you're talking about how important the clay is for holding onto the water. We don't really have any of that here. What can we expect to accomplish? And I was looking at it like, just, use the approach and let the approach and the landscape guide you, and you'll figure it out. And they've already had a new spring on their landform. They've already had the water level in their well come up from creating these earthen retention bodies. And so essentially small earthen features in the ground that when water is moving downstream, they're able to catch that, store it, and let it go into the ground. That water is charging up that landscape, making it very productive for vegetation and life for one, but then also moving through that landscape, eventually creating that raised groundwater table that they're experiencing in that well, and the seasonal spring that they now have on their landscape as a result.
And this was with soil that didn't have the characteristics that were anticipated to be needed to do the construction. So
Exactly.
well, how did they surmount that challenge?
They did projects and observed the results and then got better and better with time. And so they, applied the same techniques, understanding that they're not going to be able to hold the water year round per se, but how to get that water to go into the ground. And so they created all of these crater garden, ephemeral pool, pond type features, um, that then caught all of that. And then what they found, a lot of times you'll take one step forward and nature will take the next 10. And you just need to be observant enough to figure out what the right step forward is, because they're collecting a lot of water off of their road. And the material that they add to the road actually has a lot of clay in it. And so every time it rains, the water is grabbing clay and depositing it in the depressions that they've created. So they will actually hold water better and better over time.
That's kind of a wonderful miracle, isn't it?
It
Nature's
is,
intelligence.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And where,
So
if you can see, so many times there are so many gifts on a given landscape that just go unrecognized. How long has that clay traveled downstream, causing issues in waterways downstream without anybody seeing, hey, this is an awesome resource that could benefit us in this landscape and life? And a lot of times it's just taking the time to be present on land to observe those gifts to then be able to work with them appropriately.
I love that. I'm thinking of one of the reasons being one of the reasons for the depletion of the water table and the growth of all these fire and flood issues, as you said, is development, because we are depleting the water table. But not only are we doing that, but we're covering the ground. And so I'm wondering, I live in a suburb at this point, and when it rains, water goes in torrents down the road, down the sewer. And I'm wondering how to take your kind of awareness into an urban landscape. What can we do as city dwellers or suburban dwellers to help restore the water cycle?
Yeah, there's two pieces to this equation. One that I think is very important in cities and not to be overlooked is advocacy. All of our governance is in cities all around the world, and the fish, the earthworms, the trees, they don't have an advocate in those spaces. And so can you be a voice for the voiceless and speak truth to power in those spaces? Show up to the city hall meeting where they're talking about paving a big area and say, "Hey, could we do permeable pavement in this parking lot instead?" Um, and then the other very practical thing, rain gardens make a ton of sense in situations like this in urban settings, whether they're individual rain gardens as part of the house, where you have water coming off of the roof of your home or the driveway. Can you find places to store that water and hold it on the landscape, even if it's not all of it, just some portion of it? Get that going into the ground where you are, and not only does that, so for one, this has all the environmental benefits, but two, it has very tangible benefits to that city and that location. Because in most places, they have tremendous issues dealing with stormwater. And when there's heavy rains, they're basically discharging diluted raw sewage into whatever waterways are in that area because they have too much water to be able to process, so they just have to discharge it. And for example, in Portland, there used to be streets where there was a different type of brown trout flowing down the street in the heavy rains. And they fixed that issue by creating these rain gardens in every little spot that they can. And still to this day, they create a whole bunch of rain gardens every year. For them, it's about mitigating the stormwater issue, but then it also has this rehydration, this localized cooling, this environmental benefit that for us is the main focus, but it becomes very easy to pitch it and get people to buy in cities because it has these very tangible economic benefits as well.
So I know you have this program. It's a year-long program, correct?
Uh,
And
6 months.
6 months. Okay. And it cycles, when does it start? What month?
It starts in the beginning of April. So this year, registration will close the end of March and we'll start the course April 7th. And then it runs for 6 months from that point.
Okay. So how many people are typically in your courses now?
Yeah, we cap it at 100 for the live course because it's a very intensive workload on us to give everyone support. And we find that's a good number where the community of students is super active. People are all learning from each other, but it doesn't take full control over our lives in terms of helping everyone meet their objectives.
Got it. So I'm wondering, I can vouch for the fact that it's intensive for the students too, and I think it's ideal for folks that have a place where they can actually implement what they're learning. For me being in the suburbs, it became academic, which was unfortunate. I just was chomping at the bit to want to be able to do something. But I'm wondering if you might have resources or any kind of maybe even shorter term course for folks that are city dwellers or suburban dwellers where they could learn really how to utilize this knowledge.
Yeah, so for one, we have a whole ton of free content all about these types of projects. So that's a really good starting place for people. And that's always what we recommend first, because you can learn so much just by watching the films and animations and things that we've put out that are all available right now on our website, waterstories.com, on the community. So that's a really good starting point. From there, we have, so for one, with the course, we set it up in a way where even if you have no land access, you can go through the course on the advocate pathway. But like you said, you really get out of the course what you put into it. It's an online course, but it's really at home, because by doing all of the exercises, that's where you really learn these things. Um, and so what we do have also is a self-paced program that goes over 12 months. And then you can use that as a credit towards the live program as well in the future. And so for people that are ready to dive in, the 6 month program is perfect because it's an intense 6 months, but it's an intense 6 months. You need time to really put into it to get everything out of it. Then we've also created this longer time frame where you can do the self-paced course over 12 months, then eventually join the live course if you choose to. Now you start out way ahead, so it's not as intense. And so for people that want a longer time frame, that's a really nice way to go. And then we are also working on a couple of courses now. We're working on a pond building course and a spring tapping course that'll be independent. Those might come out later this year or next year. Then we're also going to be creating an introduction to water cycle restoration course, which will be super cheap, simple, easy to go through to just start getting your mind wrapped around these things, start doing them on your landscape. Maybe you're someone who doesn't want to become a professional or doesn't want to make their own project yet, but just want to start dipping your toes into the water. And so we don't have that yet, but we do have it in the works, and planned for, again, probably later this year or early next year.
That's so exciting. So are you actually working on projects still, and are you still doing consulting and all of that good stuff?
Yep, yep, definitely. That's what pays all the bills and is the day job. Water Stories is really more of an outreach, passion, capacity building project. So very much still doing projects, though we are really trying to scale back and only do projects that are open to some type of educational components as well. And so something we started doing last year that was really great and we'll be doing this year as well is on some of our projects where we're implementing these types of things, having an intensive, a week-long in-person intensive for our students who have already gone through the course to all get together and implement projects together. And that was a really amazing experience. We did one last year in Oregon. We'll do one this year in Portugal. And it's just 8 days of, it's really nice because everyone has taken the course, so we don't need to do any classroom time. We're just straight out into the field. Here's why we did these things, get some practice doing these things. In the last one, people were practicing on the excavator, learning how to do all of these different tools and techniques. And it's really awesome to see how with the online course, a lot of people right away after the online course are ready to get rolling. And then a number of people with the online course and then the in-person course, they're totally off into the races, because now they really feel confident and comfortable. So even in our shorter workshops, we did another one in Italy for students only, and around half of the class got their first projects right after the workshop ended because they were so clear and confident in what they could do and how, and the clients ended up seeing that confidence and ability and then hiring them as a result.
Oh, wow. Well, so that reminds me of a model from Dome Gaia. The way that Dome Gaia works is that they have workshops to build their aircrete domes. They have somebody who wants the project. The person pays for all the materials, provides housing for people and food. The people pay for the workshop. They show up. They're a workforce for the workshop, and they create something. And it sounds like that's a similar model, yeah, to what you're doing.
Yeah, we kind of have two different bents on it. We have, and these are both only available to people who've already done the course. One is an intensive that's a workshop that is all focused on the student experience. And so it's similar, but we tell the client, don't expect to be done with the projects at the end of this. You can hire us or hire students or finish it yourself. And then we also do volunteer opportunities where the students pay with their work. They don't pay to be there, but they are working to be there. And so we also have that kind of experience where the focus is get the project done, learn in the process. Whereas the intensives are how do we make the most enriching learning experience as possible for our students? And we're not as concerned about, the project is still happening, work's still getting done, but it's not our main objective. The students are our main objective in that one.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know that you alluded to this a little bit today, but initially it was a challenge financially to be able to keep the lights on. And I'm wondering if hopefully that's passed as you're gaining more traction.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's now to the point where it holds itself afloat, which is I had to put all of my life savings into it to get it started, which is, the case for many startups. But also the way we've done things, we have set our aim to be student experience and quality above all else. And so there's lots of ways we could have done things cheaper that wouldn't have resulted in as good of a course, as good a content, as good a films. And I basically said, this is what I believe in. This is my life's work. I'm going to put everything I have into it. And it is in a really good spot now where it keeps itself afloat. I don't have to put any more money into it, which is great. That enables me to, earn from my projects and be fine, be very comfortable. And it also enables us to create more free content as part of running the course each year. We can keep making more films, animations, all of these different things. So it's definitely created a bit of a flywheel now to get more and more of this work into the world.
And you do have extraordinary content. Your films are wonderful, and
Oh, thank you.
there's so much great information, wonderful resources. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. It's just mind blowing. And it's a testament to what an impact one person can make with a vision. I know you have a team. I know that it doesn't exist without a team, but it's your vision that you are propagating out into the world that's making such a difference. I'm wondering if you could share a couple more dramatic stories for us or with us.
Yeah, one that's very relevant right now, is that one of our projects in Malibu saved the house twice. First from wildfire, and then again from the landslide from the flooding rains after the wildfire. Now, this was in the Malibu fires a couple of years ago, not this most recent LA fire, but the same kind of strategies. If California had looked at that and said, hey, let's apply this statewide, they wouldn't be having near the issues that they have. And, this is a project that we should be ringing the cowbells about. But the reality is, most of the work that we did was pre-legal, which means we can't be very vocal about it because it might get our client in trouble. And so, this place where it's so utterly needed, the regulatory framework is so broken that it would have cost more to try and permit the project than it actually cost to implement the project. And if we had tried to permit it, we probably would have never been allowed to do it. And so it's just this messed up, frustrating scenario. And similar, a friend of mine, Peter Marshall in Australia, he had fires burning around him for 2 months, coming in from every different angle. He was turning crown fires, where they're burning through the crown of the tree, to ground fires through his land management. A lot of it was helped and saved by willows that he's been fined nearly $1 million for having on his property because they're an invasive species. And so again, really clear solutions that held up really well in a really traumatic, intense event. And yet, if you try and do this yourself in Australia, you'll probably pay a lot of fines for growing the trees that have naturalized to that landscape.
So you have to, I can't imagine that you haven't asked yourself, okay, so now what? You mentioned advocacy, but clearly the policies and permitting and all of that needs to change. Clearly, it's a remnant from a bygone era that is not anymore relevant, is no longer relevant to our needs and the threats that are facing us. So what is that something that Water Stories is deeply engaged in, or how, how does that work?
Yeah, and my frustration with that whole paradigm is led to water stories in a way that we need to change these rules. We need to understand, and I think the biggest thing actually that's needed is just clarity. Clarity in what we can do, how, and what it can result in. And it's been really amazing to see that as more and more people get clear on that and talk about it with others, we need a few things. We need people with civil courage, like Sepp Holzer, who are going to say, this is what's right for my landscape, and I obey the laws of nature, not the laws of man. And those people trudge forward and break through all the walls and provide the examples for the subsequent people to say, hey, look at this. This worked really well. Why don't we allow more of that to happen? And this is similar, one of our projects, the ground in Oregon, where, you know, we pushed a project through, implemented it. It's really beautiful and amazing. It's led to lots of other people in the area doing this type of work. And it's led to the formation of a nonprofit organization called Permaculture Land Users Group Oregon, Plug Oregon, that is actively and making pretty nice progress trying to change the law to allow people to hold water up to a quarter-acre pond, catch the rains that are technically owned by somebody else, and let those benefit that landscape. And they're having a lot of success and gaining a lot of headway because it's people that are very clear in what they're doing. It's examples that already exist on the ground in that location. And it's those advocates saying, hey, look at this. Let's make more logical policy that allows more of this to happen.
Do you have those legal resources on your site? Do you have those case studies somewhere that people can identify and maybe reuse in in their local environments?
Yeah, I'll say we don't have any real firm finalized things. These are all in process. So I would refer people to the Plug Oregon site, PLUG Oregon, and they're making really good headway. So if you're interested in doing this, for example, in Colorado or California or wherever, they would really be able to help you get started along that journey. And that's their hope, is that they can provide a proof of concept in Oregon for it to then spread to all the neighboring states.
It's kind of
Um,
like the rights of nature fight too, where
exactly.
it's starting to migrate to other areas as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other interesting thing about all of this is that you have also the, super high net worth tech businesses want to be water neutral and are trying to find projects to invest in that can show that they're putting water into the ground. So everything's kind of aligning for it, where the big money at the top is ready to fund it. The people on the ground see the results and want to do it. And we really just need to massage the policy and funding vehicles to allow those people on the ground to implement and receive the benefits from, the money from the Microsofts and the Googles of the world that want to pay for water retention. But the ways that they're currently doing it probably, well, I won't speak to it because I don't know all the details, but it could probably be improved.
So you bring up, well, there are a couple points. One is that, in my opinion, this whole carbon focus is so misdirected. Like, if we could just direct it to the water cycle, if we could direct it to water, and maybe creating campaigns for water neutrality rather than carbon neutrality, because the water neutrality breeds the carbon neutrality, and it also transforms the issue that is a perpetuating issue otherwise. I mean, that I think that that's an area that could make a big difference. Not only that, but you said in passing, capturing the rainwater that technically belongs to somebody else. And I cannot let that go by without addressing this. I don't think people are aware of this, that in certain states it's illegal to catch rainwater, period. And I would love you to talk about that and ownership of water and why, what's the rationale behind that kind of craziness?
Yeah, when you explain it, no one thinks it's a good system. Basically, what we have in the US, west of the Mississippi by and large, is the first in time, first in right, which means if my ancestors or the ancestors of whoever I bought the land and water right from were the first to come to that area and kill all of the natives peoples, I get full access to that water before anybody else. And in other countries where if there's a water shortage, everyone shares in the shortage. And, if I have an 1890 right and you have a 1901 right, we might say, okay, I'm only going to take 75% of my water so that you can still get something this year. In the US, it doesn't work like that. I get full right to 100% of my water before you get one drop. And then they have a use it or lose it policy where if I don't use 100%, maybe I want to be nice and give you some. I, over time, risk losing my right to that 100%. So it incentivizes waste to allow future use and basically makes it where all of the newer rights don't get anything. And it's just this and then because it's all the priority is given to the downstream
What's that about?
user,
What's that about? How
we're
does
constantly taking water out of our landscapes into the ocean as quickly as possible, essentially.
So help me understand, how does that have anything to do with rainwater? Like, how can they legislate rainwater?
Yeah, so in most places now, you're allowed to store the rain that hits a building that you own, but you are not allowed to store the rain that hits the ground. And that's because that rain, that water, whether in the ground, on the ground, or in the sky, is owned by the state to be distributed by the water right system of that state for the common beneficial use, which is that. And then on top of all of it, you have a place like the Colorado River was allocated during unusually wet years. So it was over allocated from the very beginning and has only become more over allocated since, creating this absolutely insane situation. And you brought up the carbon versus water. When we look at the situation economically, it becomes literally insane that we're not doing this. In Košice, in Slovakia, the Mikhail Krachek and the New Water Paradigm team work there, and they came up with a budget to restore the whole water cycle of that whole province. The cost for that whole project lifetime cost was less than 1 year of the carbon taxes on one business in Košice. So American Steel, which operates in Košice, Slovakia, pays a carbon tax every year greater than the cost to restore the whole watershed of the Košice region. And so if we could just allocate a little bit of that money instead of to these carbon sucking machines, and kind of the whole carbon credit thing is blowing up because nobody has a good way to show what they're doing. None of it works as well as anyone thought it would. And it's kind of all being exposed as not very scientifically sound. Whereas if we could invest just 10% of that money into the landscape's ability and water holding capacity, we could change that landscape for many generations for that one-time cost.
Oh, and it sounds like in order to be able to imagine doing something like that, we need to change the legislation because it's not for the commons, actually. It's governments selling to other governments and granting Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola or other companies rights to their to the commons. It's crazy. It makes me stutter. It
Yeah.
just
It is, it's insanity. And I think a really good example that I like of a positive result from this system is Brad Lancaster's work in Tucson, Arizona, where they're doing these things we were talking about at the beginning, rain gardens, and essentially trying to get water out of streets onto landscapes. At first it was illegal, so they had to do everything on the weekend when the city workers weren't out, and they had to do all their curb cuts really quickly. Now it has gone to being required for new developments to do this kind of work because they've seen the positive impacts it has. And so he has this concept that I really like of pre-legal. This stuff isn't illegal, it's pre-legal. It's so logical, it benefits everybody, it should be legal, it's just not yet. And so we're in that process of trying to make it legal.
and what's a resource for people to follow up on him? Because I think it would be great to give you more to do, like you need this on your website to have a list of all these resources of folks that are doing these things so that people can come to one place and say, oh, okay, this is action I can take, or I can advocate for this or whatever. But how do we connect? Did you say Brad Lancaster?
Yeah, Brad Lancaster and harvestingrainwater.com. He has
Okay.
some beautiful books, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. There's also a film about him. Will find it on the Water Stories community. It's not one of our films, another filmmaker made it, but they're happy for us to share it there as well. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but if you go to the Water Stories site, you will see it as one of the stories. I'll try and find it in the background here.
Okay. And can you maybe wrap us up? I want to ask you for resources, but I was hoping that maybe you could wrap us up with another phenomenal story. And I love this notion of pre-legal. So we've got these environmental outlaws, essentially, that are willing to risk their freedom and fortune to be helping to support the earth in doing the magnificent things that she does.
Yeah, I mean, along that thread, to me, one of the very most striking examples is Dr. Rajendra Singh from India. We have a film all about this called Reviving Rivers, and they're through this decentralized water retention, through at this point hundreds, even thousands of communities, they have revived now 13 rivers, some to perennial flow, which were dry for decades. They've brought water back to more than 250,000 wells, impacting more than 1 million people, causing the reverse migration. People that had to leave these landscapes and go to the city and search for work now were returning because they had a viable agricultural future on that landscape. They lowered the temperature 2 degrees Celsius. They've restored the seasonal monsoon rains, and he was under house arrest with 72 legal cases against him for breaking all of these water laws, essentially. Eventually, someone high up in the government made it all go away because they saw him, and they came to him and said, why are you causing us so many troubles? And he said, oh, you know me, I'm a Gandhian. I can't cause troubles for anybody. But they saw, the people were united. Um, and that's really how this changes. For example, the government sold the fishing rights to the water bodies the people had created to somebody else. And then the people all came together and said, no, that's not your fishing right to sell. Those are our fish, and you can talk to us if you want to sell a right to that. And only because they were all together did they come out on top. If it's just one person, just a few people, it's too easy to get rid of the dissenters and scare everybody else off. And
Right.
that's why we really need this global awareness campaign so that everybody understands what's possible. And when people have issues, we can stand together and support them so that they are successful, and it perpetuates more water and life on the landscape. So as far as resources, I think the Water Stories story page is one of the best, waterstories.com. And then if you click on stories, you'll see Reviving Rivers. This one with Brand Lancaster is called The Water Harvester. That's on there as well. You'll see Courage from Nature, our animations, all sorts of stuff. And then if you're really ready to become active in this, I highly recommend the Water Stories community, which is now more than 6,000 people from more than 200 countries all around the world, starting to work with each other, learn from one another, work collectively on projects. And so you don't have to be alone doing this kind of work. There's actually a quite big and everyday growing community of people that care about this type of thing, that are working on it every day. And it's really amazing to see the power that comes from those connections. Projects just go further, happen quicker, are stronger, and spread, on a much wider scale than when we're working in silos alone.
It's the growth curve, and you're just you're not even up to exponential yet, but it's getting closer and closer, and what a difference that'll make as that just pops.
That's the
So
hope. And it's really awesome to see. I mean, we have probably more than 30 people now running a business like Elemental Ecosystems, my business, doing these projects for everybody. And then we have hundreds of people doing it on their own landscapes and on their own farms and in their own backyards. And like you're saying, it's just the start. And every place that it happens, the neighbors see it and say, hey, I want a nice green and blue landscape that's cool in the hot summer days and gives me water in the dry times and where I don't burn. So it just makes so much sense that yeah, it's really special to watch it spread.
so with your private company, if somebody wanted to hire you, Elemental Ecosystems, how do they find you, Zach, to be able to talk to you about a project?
Yeah, elementalecosystems.com. And our website is ancient at this point, so apologies there. All of our focus goes into water stories, but that's how they can contact me about working with us. And then we also have on the water stories page, you can also work with any practitioner, where you can submit your project there. And maybe I'm out of your budget range, but hiring a student who's just getting started but is fully prepared to doing work might be more within. So that's also an option. And we're building a whole professional network for projects to help connect our students with work.
Wonderful. And these are all certified students. They have your blessing, you vetted them, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Exactly.
awesome. So, what should I have asked you that I didn't ask?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, man, I think one of the biggest things is just who is this accessible to? And the answer is everybody. That's one of the things that I love seeing. In our intensive, we had people in their 70s and we had people in their teens, all working together, shoulder to shoulder, arm to arm. And when you have something that there's no pattern of type of person that was at this event. There was everyone on the political spectrum, everyone on the social spectrum. Whenever you have something that speaks to such a wide range of different people, I think there's a lot of power in a fundamental truth that people can see there. And so that one of my favorite things about all of this is I think water is an incredible bridge issue where if you're super concerned about climate change, this makes a ton of sense. If you're not concerned at all about climate change, this makes a ton of sense. If you value just economy above all else, economy is based in ecology, and we need water in a landscape for it to be productive. So still you should care about this. Or if you only care about economy, flood, drought, and fire have huge bills that we could prevent with a little bit of preventative maintenance. And obviously, if you care about the planet, care about the environment, this is, I think, the easiest, most tangible way to see and feel the impact that your own two hands can have on a landscape.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for your vision, your persistence, your commitment. It's very, very, very inspiring. So, whew, thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners and our viewers. Please, please share this out and check out Water Stories and get involved. This is such a beautiful, beautiful key to our future. I also want to say thank you to all those of you who support us through Patreon and by joining us for our movie nights, and to Scott Billy, who is my partner here in Sustainability Now, who's also our producer. And that's a wrap for today. Live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.